Then I moved to Burbeck, where I became a Japanese studies person. So my research kind of combines both film media and Japanese studies. And I still keep affiliations in the UK. As Melina said, I am leading this project, Tramebic, which is funded by the Valencia Research Council on transnational memories in East Asian visual culture. So we are examining memory of the traumatic events of the 20th century through visual culture in the wide sense, from photos to paintings to cinema, and from a transcultural perspective. So we are trying to go beyond the national paradigm when it comes to memory. Memory tends to be articulated in national terms, so the Japanese as the perpetrators of World War II in Asia, the Koreans the victims, now the Chinese should be the heroes or the victorious people of World War II. This is the new narrative in China. So we are trying to go beyond these national parameters. And I'm going to try to explain this through this example that I'm going to show. We are going to have our next seminar in Valencia in 24th of October, and we have some coming publications. So in the case anyone is interested in collaborating with the project or participating in any of these publications, please let me know. We are having a special issue in Atalante, the main Spanish film studies journal, and also a book with Peter Lang. And we are running also a book series on Japanese studies at Valencia University Press. So if anyone in the room is interested in any of these topics or in the research project, please do let me know. We are more than happy to welcome all the other researchers. Is it? Yeah. Hi. I think, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
The topic, circulation, for many of you, the topic might sound a bit strange. So, Japanese newsreels on the war in Asia in Francoist Spain. What the hell is this? It's two distant countries, apparently not related whatsoever, like very far away, although Spain has the longest historical traditions with Japan in Europe, Spain and Portugal. We have 500 years of common history. But World War II, usually we don't study World War II, the Pacific War in relation to Spain. Doesn't make any sense. So my point is, what I am trying to do here is to show this interdisciplinary and transnational approach to the images that were being produced by the Japanese Empire, and how these images can tell us something about Francoist Spain. And still might sound a bit strange, but I will give a context, and you will see that it makes sense. Spanish Civil War is something that the Europeans in the room will be more familiar with, definitely the Spanish people in the room, but also many British here. The Spanish Civil War was very important in the UK. It's a civil war, but actually it was an international war. Nazi Germany, Italy supported Franco. It was an unseen mobilization of volunteers, the international brigades coming from the UK, Germany, France, Poland, America, to support the Spanish Republic. So it was very important, and this war anticipated the European theater of World War II. The war ended in 1939, and this is the Victory Parade in Madrid, 1939. And what's the role of Japan in the Spanish Civil War? Well, Franco quickly recognized was one of the few countries in the world which recognized the puppet state of Manchukuo in China that had been created by the Japanese Kwantung Army in the continent. Because of that, Japan left the Society of Nations of the time. No countries recognized the state of Manchukuo except for Nazi Germany, Italy, and Spain. And Spain welcomed a permanent legacy, a permanent office of the state of Manchukuo in Madrid. you have the pictures here. Actually, these pictures come from the Japanese press. You can't really see well, but you can down the pictures. And in this context, so 1939 is when the Spanish Civil War ends. At the time, Japan had already started the Sino-Japanese War. And then the Japanese press started to become interested in Franco as a potential ally against the British. So Spain at the time had colonized, from the 1910s, the northern part of Morocco, the Rif, it's what we call the Rif. And then in 1940, Spain occupied the international city of Tangier. So the Japanese interpreted this as a potential movement so that, Gibraltar, Gibraltar where it is very close to Tangier and to Ceuta. Can you see Gibraltar over there? This British city. So the Japanese interpreted this as, okay, this is a potential ally so that when we take Singapore, the Spanish are going to take Gibraltar. So we are going to have a common enemy, which are going to be the British. Eventually, that never happened, but it was there on the plans, particularly of the Spanish fascist party, Falange. Actually, that was discussed among Franco and Hitler in the famous train meeting in Hendaya in northern Spain. Eventually, as I said, it never materialized, the project. Then going back to newsreels and images, which is my field of study. So what was going on simultaneously at the time is the proliferation of an unseen number of newsreels in the world. And this is the moment in which this is the emergence of cinema and images as modern tool for propaganda. That was implemented in World War II, but it had started before in the Spanish Civil War and the following year in the Sino-Japanese War. So if you put yourself in 1936, wherever you are in the world, the breaking news in 1936 would be war in Spain, a fascist uprising against the Spanish Republic. The following year, 1937, the breaking news of the world would shift towards Asia, and they were like Japan occupies China, or declares war and a full invasion of China. In this context, Japan mobilized all the best equipment, professionals, companies. There were 5 companies you have listed there operating and producing specifically newsreels. Newsreels, those who are not familiar with that, are the news of the time. They were watched on theaters, right? There was no television at the time. So Japan mobilized the best professionals, and the best professionals were ironically communists. Unlike Europe, the Japanese propaganda, militaristic propaganda, were made by Japanese. Most of them were actually affiliated to the Japanese Communist Party, because they had the training, they had the equipment, they knew how to do it. So we have, so Sino-Japanese War started in 1937, 38. The weekly newsreels increased from 190 to more than 500. You can see, like, it was a boom of newsreels of the time. These newsreels were very important because they were not only seen in Japan, they were seen worldwide. For example, the Nanking Massacre, this is one of the hot discussions that we have nowadays, which problematizes the diplomatic relations between Japan and China. There's a big discussion currently about how many people died in the Nanking Massacre. Well, so that was well covered by images. There were hundreds of Japanese photographers, journalists, cameramen, who were sent to China before the actual occupation of Nanking. So the army, after the battles in Beijing, they moved to Shanghai. After the bloody battles in Shanghai, they ordered to take the then capital city of China, which was Nanking. So in 2 weeks, there was a big preparation. All the journalists, photographers, operators were ready to shoot the arrival of General Mitsu Iwani in Nanking. And that was widely shot. And these images circulated across the Japanese Empire, across the Axis, but also across the Allies. So actually, these images were part of the American Newsreels. And also, if you have a look at the Why We Fight series, this is the famous series by Frank Capra, which was commissioned by the American War Department, and in which it was, whose goal was to mobilize the American public opinion about the necessity, the need to enter in World War II. In these documentaries made by the US Department, they reused the footage that had been used by the Japanese. So what about Spain? So this is about the recycling and the reappropriation of material and how the material changed their meaning depending on where they travel to. So in the Franco's Spain, Franco didn't have the equipment or the professionals who could really make, at least in the early years, propaganda, newsreel propaganda, because professionals were on the Republican side and the studios were on the Republican side. So what they did was Falange, the Spanish Fascist Party, which was in charge of the propaganda, they created the Service for Recovery Documents, which meant they took documents, films, images, photos from any source. It could be the Republican side, and use it as counter-propaganda. So most of the Franco propaganda were actually images taken by the Republicans, which is quite ironical, because they didn't have the cameraman. And they also took images from the Axis, so images coming from Germany, from Italy, or from Japan. And that's how the Franco's propaganda was made. And what can we see, what were about the war in Asia in the Spanish theater? So we could see images like this train, another train meeting, now Emperor Puyi with Hirohito, which, Spain had recognized the puppet state of Manchukuo. And then, what happened after Pearl Harbor? The Japanese attack on Hawaii, the American military base, but also other bases held by the British and the Dutch. So the Spanish theaters were filled with these images that had been taken, are part of the Japanese newsreels of the Japanese taking Singapore. So you have seen here the Lieutenant Percival surrendering Singapore to General Yamashita, very famous news at the time. So the Japanese taking the Aleutian Islands in America, so there was American land taken by the Japanese, and the Japanese taking the British Burma. So all these big events were selected to be seen in Spain. How they reached Spain? Obviously, Spain didn't have operators, cameramen, and photographers in the Pacific, especially after the loss of the Philippines, the last colony, Spanish colony in the Pacific. But they reused the material, Japanese newsreels, that had traveled through Nazi Germany, and through Nazi Germany, they reached Spain. So they reused this material that had already been appropriated by Nazi Germany. So in this documentary or reportage, A Year of War in the Greater East Asia, we are going to see, I'm going to show you just a clip of 1 minute, so you can see how Falange, which, as I said, this was the fascist party which was in charge of Spanish propaganda, how they represented what was going on in Asia, okay?
El 8 de diciembre de 1941 comenzó el Japón a demoler los bastiones de Inglaterra y los Estados Unidos en el Pacífico. He aquí el desarrollo de las operaciones en el primer año de guerra en la Gran Asia Oriental. Con el bombardeo de las islas Midway fue seriamente alcanzada una de las más importantes posiciones iniciales de ataque de los Estados Unidos contra el Japón. Las fuerzas armadas niponas penetran en la ciudad. La población birmana saluda a sus liberadores. Los soldados nipones portan consigo en la triunfal marcha las cenizas de sus camaradas caídos. En los depósitos del punto inicial de la carretera de Birmania se encontraron más de 1 millón de toneladas de material de guerra destinado a los ejércitos de Chungking. La partida está perdida, Mr. Churchill.
So that was what the Spanish audience was seeing here locally in Spain about the war in Asia. Japanese material, travel through Germany. What is interesting, the Burmese, also the Japanese occupation of Burma, British Burma, was strategically very important because it was where China was getting their supplies. They were building this supply route from the Allies to China through Burma. So the Japanese wanted to cut this supply line. That is not explained in the Japanese in the newsreels in Spain. And actually, we don't know much about what's really going on in Asia, but the emphasis is Mr. Churchill. So the emphasis is not explaining what's the details about China. Keep in mind that so the Japanese were fighting another nationalist, conservative figure, which was Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang. And that was not very interesting for the Japanese for the Spanish propaganda. So they shifted the focus towards the victory over the British, which was feeding these the Falanges, the Spanish fascist fantasies about taking Gibraltar, which was the local discussion here. Not all the documentaries, not all the footage that was seen in Spain came through Germany. They took different routes. For example, there were some as well that came through France. Bear in mind that France was under occupation as well, they occupied France. So, for example, Japan at War, Japón en Guerra, is a Spanish version of a French documentary that in turn had used Japanese newsreels. Now, what is very interesting is if you compare the Spanish version and the French version, think yourself about being in 1942, so France under occupation, Spain with the new Franco's regime. So the voiceover is actually different. The French voiceover is more cautious, while the Spanish voiceover is way more enthusiastic about all the activities of the Japanese Empire in Asia. And these images, again, they show, for example, the assault on Palembang oil refineries in Indonesia, which were key for the Japanese industry. They don't explain why they are taking these oil industries, why the Japanese need the oil, the petroleum. But what they are explaining is that there is a new order in which the Americans and the British are not anymore the powers in Asia, but it's Japan, and Japan is going to be our allies. So this is what they are explaining in the films. And now, something changed in Spain in 1943, and also something changed in the world in 1943. In 1943, if you remember World War II, so it was the Nazi failure in Stalingrad and the American landing in Guadalcanal. So from 1943, the Axis armies were in clear retreat. And in Spain, there was this discussion now, okay, hey, wait, what's going on? So now, if the Axis powers are going to lose, who is going to be our friends? We need to recycle ourselves. We need to do something about it. And actually, in that sense, they were successful. Spain was the only European fascist country which continued for 4 decades, 40 more years after World War II. So how did it operate? And how the Japanese newsreels help us understand the success of the Franco's regime to perpetuate after World War II? This is the twist that I wanted to explain. So they developed this idea that actually there are 3 wars. World War II is actually 3 wars. So the fascist Falange, it was philo-Nazi, so they openly supported Hitler in the war against Russia, against the Soviet Union, and Spain sent volunteers, the Blue Legion, to fight with Hitler in Russia. But at the same time, they claimed that they were being neutral in the war against the British and the Americans in the Western European theater. And at the same time, they became pro-allies in the Pacific, so against the Japanese. How did it work out? It's quite interesting. What we can see in the newsreels is that in 1943, we still have images coming from Japan, but they start to be very boring. They only show an eclipse or children's competitions or Himeji Castle, like tourism in Japan. So it was the least newsworthy pieces ever, the most boring pieces ever. Very neutral, very ambiguous. They are still showing Japan, just in case they recover and maybe if they win the war eventually. But the message is, the tone is much calmed down, almost nothing, like no political messages there. Now, by 1945, it was already clear that the Nazi Germany was going to fall, and Japan was going to end the war. So Spain never actually showed in the Nodo, the Spanish newsreels, the fall of Nazi Germany, but they were very interested in showing the fall of Japan, because Japan was a scapegoat for the regime to show that actually we are not the bad guys and we can get closer to the Allies. So they took advantage of something that happened in the Philippines, the Battle of Philippines, February 1945. The Japanese, in retreat, killed the remaining of the Spanish colony in Manila, the former Spanish colony. So there was a Spanish community in the old city of Manila, in Intramuros. Many of the members of this community were killed by the Japanese army in retreat, and that was used by Francos to declare war on Japan. That was perfect, the perfect excuse. So now we have the scapegoat. And so they broke diplomatic relations with Japan, and then offered MacArthur to send Spanish volunteers to fight with the Americans in the Pacific. The Americans didn't accept this support, but officially Spain declared war on Japan. So they could claim that actually they were against the Axis in the Pacific, not in Europe. So now I am going to show you the last clip showing how this, the same fascist tone is there, but they changed completely the meaning and how they reinterpret the war in Asia retrospectively. So Spanish newsreel explaining the war in Asia in 1945.
1931. Los soldados japoneses parten para la conquista de Manchuria. El Japón, la primera de las naciones agresoras en esta guerra, se lanzó hace 14 años a una campaña internacional de conquista y saqueo. Shanghái, en 1936, estaba el mundo preparado para hacer frente a la agresión. Los diplomáticos japoneses en la Sociedad de las Naciones trataron de justificar sus crímenes contra la paz y la decencia. Después se retiraron. Durante todo ese tiempo, China desangrada y saqueada siguió siendo un escenario de desolación y muerte. Millones de sus habitantes se hallaban desamparados. Kuruso y Nomura, enviados japoneses a los Estados Unidos, pretendieron ser misioneros de amistad y paz. Mientras continuaban las negociaciones, sus compatriotas asestaron un golpe salvaje sin igual por lo infame. Pearl Harbor, 7 de diciembre de 1941. El cuerpo japonés de suicidas fanáticos, en ataques aéreos desesperados, causaron enormes daños a las fuerzas navales americanas en Okinawa. Esos eran los kamikazes. Fue un ataque sensacional, pero jamás contuvo el avance aliado.
So now you can see three.
Los ingleses lanzan
So you can see that only this newsreel was shown in Spain only 3 years after the previous one, and the perspective has changed completely. And now we have the same fascist voice with the same tone, but taking the position of the Allies against the Japanese. And actually they were successful because eventually they managed to convince the US so that Spain could enter United Nations in the early 1950s. And it's very interesting how we can see this through the Japanese newsreel. So as a conclusion, this transnational and interdisciplinary approach to these images is very interesting because they reveal this global circulation of images that actually we think that it is 21st century, actually, that happened since the beginning, since the inception of cinema, and it intensified in World War II. And these images which are key to understand how we socialize or we create collective memories, the socialization of memory through images. They explain this. It's interesting to see also how this, if we approach these images about the war in Asia, they don't tell us much about what was going on in Asia, but they tell us something about the changing needs that were taking place in Spain. I mean, the needs of Franco's regime. So this is the twist that are interesting to explore when we deal with images. How they travel, they migrate, and in this migration, they are reappropriated and their meanings change depending on the context, the synchronic contexts in which they are received and shown. So yeah, I will leave it here. It's just 25 minutes sharp. Hopefully you like it, then open for questions or discussion.
Okay, if there are any questions, please put your hands up.
Thank you, Marcus, very much. Anne Boddington from IAFOR. I'm really interested to know how these films are viewed in Japan now.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I haven't done research on reception of this material in Japan nowadays, but there has been a project about digitalizing all this material, and they are available online. And this is a public initiative. It wasn't a public initiative like 20 years ago. I'm not sure if nowadays, with the current administration, which has these groups which are negationists, it's so easy to implement. But yeah, there is also an interest of keeping this material, preserving this material, and it was digitalized. That was a Japanese initiative. How this is received in the Japanese context, that is extremely problematic in the sense that there is a memory struggle in Asia, but also there is a memory struggle inside of Japan. About the negationists groups and forces supported now by the administration, and with other groups, and this is a very hot topic actually in Japan, because also involves all the images we have seen involve, well, these transnational interactions. So involve Southeast Asian countries, China, Korea, and that keeps conditioning the diplomatic relations that Japan has in the region. So it's a very sensitive material. Yeah, it's very extremely, and it's difficult for filmmakers nowadays to recycle this material too, because they put you in a difficult position, and you need to be careful on how you treat these issues.
Thank you very much. Maybe I missed it because I came a little late to your presentation, but did you think of using these materials in order to let especially young people learn something about the news about war today? Because we have different crises in the world where different TV stations give us information about the truth in certain areas. And maybe it is much easier to talk about material that is not from the present, but from the past, to make problems clear and to sensitize for a kind of fake news, or maybe do not say fake news, but different perspectives coming out of different political backgrounds. And I think such a material you presented could be a very good source for sensitizing people for that fact. And I think it's necessary in the world to sensitize the people for those kind of informations, and maybe misleading informations, or informations out of perspective, so it's not easy to say what's right or what's wrong.
Thank you very much. What's your name, sorry?
My name is Gudrun Marzi-Bönke from TU Dortmund University in Germany.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a great question, and actually that's precisely the point of using. This was research, but this is also teaching material in a sense. And that's why I teach Japanese studies, but I also teach film and media. And when I teach film and media, the most important thing for us, as film and media people, is to show that images are never presenting reality. They are representing reality. And if you represent something, you are taking a position, right? And that's key to understand. Is the basis of images. But you need to work this with the students, because not only the students, but the public opinion tend to think, because I have seen it in an image, so this is real. And we need to explain that there is always a perspective. No matter what image is, there is a selection and an interpretation, right? So sometimes, yeah, in the world of conflict that we are living, may be useful to take this step back and take a bit of distance, as you just said, and show that actually this issue has been there always since the beginning of cinema, or since the beginning of images. And then, yeah, exactly. So you show an example very far away, about even a distant place, Japan, 100 years ago, and see how. But the interesting thing is seeing how the problem continues and how you can link this to contemporary problems, right? Because now we have a proliferation of images. They are omnipresent, way more than it was back in the 1930s. And seeing that yeah, images don't present anything really. And what these images of, to go back to the case study, so the Japanese newsreels in Spain, they don't explain anything about the war in Asia. They tell us something about Franco's dictatorship just here. Maybe you can think about it in the contemporary. What images we are receiving, they might tell you something about what you have, the present political situation in your local context, rather than the reality. And then thinking about, yeah, so are there other perspectives? What is the other side? Is there anything behind of the image? What was the purpose of the image? Who took the image with which purpose? Now, how they have been appropriated, how they are being reinterpreted. All these problems are not solved. They are more important now than before, actually, yeah, right? So yeah, thank you very much. I completely agree, and I think this is precisely the potential, I think, the educational potential that this material has, yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much, Marcos, for your presentation. This is Montse from Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. Yeah. And your presentation reminded me an essence of one of the video letters that Isaki Lacuesta sent to Naomi Kawase when he shows, or he recognizes that he saw the first Japanese person in the ethnographic museum in Banyolas. And I was thinking about my representation of Japanese people and war at the end of Frankism, and it came from the American movies mainly. And I'm curious, I'm just wondering about what happened with the Japanese cinema, Japanese films. It means, did the Spanish population have access to Kurosawa or Ozu films and made this change the representation of the society in Japan based on these historical movies or the everyday life and family and so on?
Thank you very much. I have presented this topic on Spain-Japan relations, although usually I don't work on this topic. I just focus on Japan only. So I cannot give you like exact details of what Japanese films were seen in Spain. What I can tell you is that first, so the images that the Spanish people had about Japan changed significantly. So during the Spanish Civil War, it was a complete appropriation by the fascists, the Falange. The founder of the Legión Española, Millán Astray, even wrote a book about Japanese Bushido. So comparing Japanese Bushido as the morale the Spanish should have, like so making this comparison or this appropriation of medieval stories in modern terms. And then it was seen like the fight of Japan against China was seen by the Franco side as a model of a Spanish crusade against communism. It was completely mistaken because also the Japanese were not only fighting the communists, they were also fighting nationalists. and the Franco was one of them. But they created this narrative or this imaginary. This imaginary changed probably in the post-war period, 1950s. The arrival of Rashomon, Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon, opened Japanese cinema to the world, and this film received the best prizes in Venice Film Festival, in Berlin Film Festival, and I am pretty sure it was shown in Spain during the 1950s, because even if Japan had the biggest film industry in the world, only behind Hollywood, in the 1920s, 1930s, 1950s, it was not seen in Europe until 1950s. Rashomon opened this market. And then during the following years, Japanese films were winning the most important prizes at the most important film festivals in Europe, and then even winning prizes in Hollywood, the Oscars. Like, for example, Rashomon received an Oscar of the American Academy as the best foreign film. I have the impression that these films were probably seen in Spain too, and then people had this image of the Japanese not as the militaristic that they used to be, but as traditional people, like, because all the films that were selected to be seen in Europe were jidekeki, were period dramas in which they were wearing kimonos, and this is the kimono effect, and is this the image of traditional Japan. So this is the image that people had probably even until today. Rashomon is very interesting because Rashomon is about a trial, actually. If you have you watched the film Rashomon, Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon? It's about a trial to try to find out who was the assassin, and there are different points of view, and it's difficult to tell who is actually the responsible of the crime, and there are discussions about saying that actually, and that's why this film was particularly popular in Germany and in Italy, because it's the collapse of the historical truth. And the German and Italian audiences understood well the film because this is what we are experiencing now. So the narratives have fallen, and now we have to believe in something different. And there are authors claiming that that's why Rashomon was not so popular. It was so popular in the UK and in America, but just because of technical aspects, but not because the point that we have lost the narrative. In the Anglo-American context, they didn't lose the narrative. They were the winners and they imposed the narrative. But in continental Europe, the same in Spain, it's something that Spanish people could engage to as well, the fall of the narratives. So now what we are going to believe? We were said that we were fighting a sacred war, we were fighting for the god, and now this is not true anymore. And so the collapse of the narratives is something that is there in the Japanese film, and it's something shared with continental European audiences. That said, in terms of films, in terms of reception, Japanese, they were not militarist anymore. They were traditional people. Completely untrue, because Japan was under a big process of modernization in the post-war period. But yeah.
Okay, we're out of time. So thank you so much, Professor Marcos Centeno.
Thank you.
Join me in thanking him, please. Thank you.